Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local.
All right, so let's move on to, since we're sort of tiptoeing around the edges here of Google's status as a monopoly abusing its market position. Let's talk about the DOJ slides. The Department of Justice gave its closing argument, as did Google, in the long-running antitrust case. It's been around for 3+ years, that tackles a number of topics, one of which is the default search relationships with Apple and Mozilla, and a couple of others are in there, the legitimacy of that, and then also its advertising products. There were some other issues in there, and the DOJ released some slides that constituted its closing argument around the paid search advertising and PLAs to some degree. And it was a 143 slide presentation, and it was pretty interesting. I had been personally focused on the Apple relationship and the 20+ billion that Google's giving to Apple and others to maintain those default search relationships. But this was entirely about price fixing, or how Google manipulates prices in the auction in order to maintain and grow revenues against the backdrop of what might otherwise happen in the market if they didn't raise prices artificially. And there was a lot of testimony at the trial by Jerry Dishler and others about
Hold it. These are better prices. They're not higher prices. Oh, they happen to be higher prices, but they're better prices.
They're more, Mike, they're more fair. They're not necessarily higher. They're more fair. That was the line.
So for context, this was an answer from the VP of Product.
Dr. Adam Judah, VP of Product, yes.
I would describe it less
higher
as
prices
raising
are not
prices
higher,
and
they're more
coming
fair.
up with
well,
more fair prices.
The deck is really striking when you go through it. When you go through it, you really, it's a pretty compelling argument that Google is manipulating prices, raising prices, not being transparent with advertisers, and doing so explicitly to meet its quarterly numbers, or to please Wall Street. And they don't care about competition. I mean, one of the things that people misunderstand is that it's not illegal to be a monopoly. It's illegal to abuse that power, right? So that's what Google is being charged with. And so price fixing or price manipulation, which is one of the classic issues in these monopoly cases, prices are raised for the consumer, the end user, is really what they're going after here. And it's, in my view, it's a pretty compelling argument.
And most also compelling, but at meta level, was their ability to show that search advertising, as opposed to social or display advertising, was a unique market that Google uniquely controls, and which businesses are not going to shift their money from search to display or social. Those are separate advertising budgets. I thought that was a particularly effective argument as well.
The point there is that, go ahead, David.
The whole slides made me stand up and cheer as a U.S. taxpayer that my tax dollars funded the salaries of the people who created this document. It was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I thought they just nailed Google to the wall on every single point. It was very clearly laid out, even for people who are not in this space. I thought it was just a terrific rhetorical narrative that I hope leads to some real action. So,
yeah, to your point, Mike, the issue is, is there competition? Is there competition in the space? And what Google was, and what the DOJ was arguing, was that you cannot substitute other kinds of ads for search ads. So that advertisers are compelled, or more or less compelled, to keep spending on Google. Google doesn't have any effective competition in search advertising. You can't just go into display advertising or product listing ads or social media and cover yourself if you pulled out of Google. And there were a bunch of advertiser testimonials in there saying this is always on advertising. It's essential, and it's essentially foundational to our program. So I agree with you, David. It was a really good, really strong presentation. And, the judge seems, some of the people that were reporting on the hearing said that the hearing was sort of inconclusive from their point of view, because the judge seemed to be poking holes in both sides' arguments and challenging both sides. I believe there will be a finding of liability on some of the counts or some of the claims against Google. And the real question is, what does the DOJ, or what does the court do about, not the DOJ, but what does the court do about that? What is the remedy here? And we'll have to wait and see. It's going to be a couple of months at least before we get that outcome. And it can be appealed, of course.
And I'm sure will be. I think Google's now, we learned from our friends in the EU that Google's been appealing the shopping case for like 10 years in the EU. And it's still unresolved. So clearly cheaper for Google to pay lawyers that long than actually pay the fine. So
right, because I mean the revenue keeps rolling in during that the pendency of the appeal, and whatever bad practice was happening probably doesn't get suspended, or discontinued. It's a Trump-like delay strategy, it seems to me. So,
well, Trump is using a Google-like delay strategy.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Google employed this strategy before he was a candidate. So
that's right.
That's right. Trump has learned from Google. All right. So I think that brings us to the end of this week's discussion. Obviously, there's a lot more to talk about, but we're out of time for today. And thank you very much for joining us. Tell your friends and come back next time.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.